The phone call came just as Olivia Carter was stepping out of the courtroom, the adrenaline of another case victory still coursing through her veins. She barely had time to register the number before answering, her mind already racing through potential legal matters. Another client, another contract dispute, another urgent issue demanding her expertise. But the voice on the other end of the line was not a client. It was Mrs. Reynolds, an elderly neighbor from the quiet suburban community where her brother, Daniel Carter, had lived before being deployed. "Olivia, dear, I didn't know who else to call." The woman's voice wavered, laced with urgency. "I thought you should know. There are people moving into Daniel's house. They've changed the locks. The HOA put up a notice last week, but I didn't think they'd actually." A cold chill ran down Olivia's spine as she stopped dead in her tracks, gripping her phone tighter. "Wait, what do you mean, moving in? That house belongs to Daniel," she said, her voice sharp with confusion. "He's deployed. No one was supposed to touch it." "That's what I thought too, but they auctioned it. The HOA did. It's already been sold." The words hit Olivia like a physical blow, her breath catching in her throat as if someone had punched her. Impossible. There had to be a mistake. Her brother had left everything in order before his deployment, mortgage payments scheduled, mail forwarded to her address, no outstanding debts beyond the usual utilities. The house was his legally and unequivocally. Her mind whirred, flipping through the possibilities, searching for a logical explanation, but none came. The only thing she could do now was see it for herself. Without another word, she sprinted to her car, barely registering the honking horns as she wove through the late afternoon traffic, her knuckles turning white against the steering wheel. By the time she pulled into the once familiar driveway, her heart was pounding. The house was still there, pristine as ever, its pale blue shutters and well-maintained lawn a testament to the home Daniel had built for himself. But something was off. A moving truck sat parked out front, its back doors yawning open, furniture being carried inside by hired movers. Olivia's stomach twisted. She barely heard the sound of her car door slamming behind her as she stormed up the front steps. The doormat was different. The welcome sign Daniel's friends had gifted him when he bought the house. Gone. Instead, a new wreath hung on the door, an unfamiliar symbol of someone else's claim. A man in his late 40s, dressed in khaki shorts and a polo shirt, stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand, watching the movers work. Olivia didn't hesitate. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cold, controlled. "Who are you?" The man turned, surprised at her sudden presence. "Oh, I'm Mark Thompson. My wife and I just bought this place," he said, flashing a hesitant smile before gesturing toward the movers. "We're just getting settled in." Olivia's jaw clenched. "You bought it? From whom?" Mark frowned slightly, as if the question caught him off guard. "From the HOA, he said slowly. "It was listed in a foreclosure auction. We got a great deal." A sharp, burning rage ignited in Olivia's chest. "That's impossible. My brother owns this house. He's overseas. He never missed a mortgage payment." Now Mark's expression shifted, wary. "Look, I don't know what to tell you. We went through all the paperwork. It's legal." HOA said the previous owner fell behind on payments for community fees. That's why it was repossessed. Community fees. Olivia inhaled sharply, her pulse hammering. She knew how ruthless some homeowners associations could be, how they buried residents in obscure fines, threatened liens over minuscule infractions. But to steal a deployed soldier's home under the guise of unpaid HOA fees? That was beyond unethical, it was criminal. Her hands balled into fists at her sides. "I need to see the documentation," she demanded. "Every paper, every transaction. If there's been fraud, I will find it." Before Mark could respond, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The door opened, and out stepped a woman Olivia recognized all too well. Rebecca Whitmore, HOA president, perfectly polished in a beige suit and pearl earrings, the epitome of suburban control. Rebecca didn't look surprised to see Olivia standing there, only mildly inconvenienced, like she had anticipated this confrontation but hoped to avoid it. "Ms. Carter," she said smoothly, her red lips curving into something that might have been a smile if not for the calculating glint in her eyes. "I assume you received our notices?" Olivia turned to her, fury barely contained. "Notices?" she echoed, voice like steel. "You stole my brother's house while he was deployed. I don't know what game you're playing, but I will take this to court." Rebecca sighed, feigning patience. "Ms. Carter, this isn't personal. Your brother failed to pay his HOA fees for 6 months. It's all in accordance with the regulations. The auction was legal. Legal." The word sent a fresh wave of anger crashing through Olivia. She knew all too well how people like Rebecca weaponize bureaucracy, twisting rules just enough to justify blatant wrongdoing. But they had picked the wrong family to mess with. Her voice was steady, lethal. "We'll see what the court has to say about that." Rebecca held her gaze for a moment before shrugging. "Do as you must, but I'd advise you to let it go." She turned on her heel and walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement. Olivia watched her go, her hands trembling. Not with fear, but with determination. She wasn't just going to get Daniel's house back. She was going to destroy everyone who had a hand in this. Olivia spent the entire night hunched over her desk, the glow of her laptop screen illuminating the deep lines of concentration on her face, as she sifted through every legal document related to her brother's house. The weight of exhaustion pulled at her, but she refused to give in to it. This wasn't just a case. This was Daniel's home, and someone had stolen it under the guise of legality. She had started with the most obvious source, the county property records. As expected, the deed had been transferred just a week ago to Mark Thompson, the new homeowner, after an HOA auction. But what sent a chill down Olivia's spine was the timeline. The foreclosure process had started months earlier, while Daniel was deployed, without so much as a single direct notice to him. Instead, the HOA had sent letters to his mailbox, letters that Daniel, serving in an active war zone, had no way of receiving. Olivia's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. They had known he wouldn't see the notices. They had planned for this. Her pulse pounded as she pulled up the payment history. Daniel had never missed a mortgage payment. But there it was, a record of unpaid HOA dues totaling just under $800. $800. That was all it had taken for them to strip him of his home. She scrolled further, and that was when she saw it. Late fees, administrative costs, interest charges, penalties, each piling up until the total debt supposedly owed had ballooned past $5,000. Enough to justify a lien. Enough to trigger a foreclosure. It was a scam, plain and simple. They had bided their time, allowing the fees to stack up in Daniel's absence, knowing that by the time anyone noticed, it would be too late. And then they had sold his house for a fraction of its worth. Olivia's jaw clenched. Pushing back from the desk, she reached for her phone and dialed the county clerk's office. After several rings, a tired voice answered. "This is Olivia Carter," she said, forcing calm into her tone. "I need to verify the foreclosure documentation on 146 Maplewood Drive. Who signed off on it?" The clerk hesitated. "One moment, ma'am." The seconds stretched unbearably long before the voice returned. It was approved by the HOA board and processed by their legal representative, a Richard Dawson. Olivia's grip tightened around the phone. Richard Dawson. The name was instantly familiar. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was the president of the HOA, a man infamous in legal circles for exploiting loopholes in homeowner agreements. He had been sued 3 times before for predatory enforcement of HOA rules, but each time, he had wormed his way out of consequences, citing technicalities. Now, it was clear, Dawson had orchestrated this from the beginning. She hung up, her mind already racing ahead. There had to be more. If Dawson had done this to Daniel, it was unlikely that he had stopped at just one house. By morning, she was seated in a downtown cafe, laptop open, legal pads scattered across the table. Her coffee sat untouched as she scoured records, tracing patterns, looking for other victims. And she found them. At least 7 other homes had been legally auctioned under Dawson's watch in the last 2 years. All cases where the homeowners had been absent for extended periods. One was a woman who had been undergoing chemotherapy in another state. Another was an elderly man who had moved in with his daughter while recovering from a stroke. And now Daniel, a soldier serving his country, whose only crime was trusting that his home would be safe while he was gone. Olivia's stomach twisted with disgust. This wasn't mismanagement. This was a racket. And Dawson had been profiting off it, selling the properties at cut-rate prices to buyers with ties to the HOA board itself. She slammed her laptop shut. This wasn't just about getting Daniel's house back anymore. This was about exposing everything. That afternoon, Olivia drove straight to the HOA office, an unassuming brick building nestled in the middle of a pristine commercial plaza. She didn't bother knocking. She walked in like she owned the place, heels clicking against the polished floor as she made her way to the receptionist. "I need to speak with Richard Dawson. Now." The receptionist, a young woman with a nervous expression, glanced around. "Do you have an appointment?" Olivia gave her a look so sharp it could cut glass. "No, but I have a lawsuit with his name on it, and I promise you, if he doesn't see me right now, the next place he'll be sitting is a courtroom." The woman swallowed hard and picked up the phone. A moment later, she motioned toward the hallway. "Last door on the right." Olivia didn't wait for an invitation. She pushed the door open, stepping into a minimalist office where Richard Dawson sat behind an expensive mahogany desk, reviewing paperwork with an infuriatingly calm expression. "Ms. Carter," he said without looking up, "I assume you're here about the Maplewood property." Olivia leaned forward, planting her palms on his desk. "You stole my brother's house." Dawson finally looked up, his gaze unreadable. "Your brother failed to meet his obligations. The sale was legal." Her lips curled in contempt. "You manufactured those obligations. You inflated the fees. You knew he was deployed. And let me guess, who was the lucky buyer? A friend of yours?" A small smirk ghosted across Dawson's face. "The buyers went through a fair bidding process." Olivia's fingers twitched with the urge to wipe that smug look off his face. "I know exactly what you've been doing, Dawson. You've done this to at least 7 other people. But this time you made a mistake." His smirk didn't waver. "Oh," she leaned in, voice low and lethal. "You messed with the wrong family." For the first time, something flickered behind Dawson's eyes. Not fear, but recognition. A silent understanding passed between them. Olivia wasn't just another angry homeowner. She was a lawyer, a damn good one, and she wasn't here to beg for explanations. She was here to bury him. Dawson exhaled, sitting back in his chair. "Well," he said, voice smooth, measured, "if you're planning to challenge this, I'd advise you to reconsider. The legal fees alone. I don't care what it costs." Olivia cut in. "I'm taking you to court. And when I'm done, you're not just losing my brother's house. You're losing your entire operation." Dawson watched her for a long moment, then smiled. A slow, deliberate expression that sent a chill down her spine. "Then I guess I'll see you in court." Olivia turned on her heel and walked out without another word. Her heart pounded in her chest, but not with fear, with purpose, because she wasn't just going to fight this battle. She was going to win. Olivia knew from the moment she walked out of Richard Dawson's office that this wouldn't be a straightforward legal battle. The HOA had operated in the shadows for years, exploiting loopholes and manipulating homeowners with impunity. And now that their scheme had been exposed, they wouldn't go down without a fight. But neither would she. The next morning, she filed the lawsuit against the HOA in state court, citing violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act, SCRA, a federal law designed to protect deployed military personnel from precisely this kind of legal and financial exploitation. She had spent the entire night preparing the filing, her legal arguments sharpened to a razor's edge, ensuring there was no room for Dawson or his cronies to maneuver. But as she handed the papers to the clerk at the courthouse, a sinking feeling settled in her stomach. This was only the beginning. Within 24 hours, the retaliation began. The first sign was subtle. A few veiled messages left on her office voicemail from unknown numbers, suggesting she dropped the case before things got messy. Then came the more blatant intimidation tactics. HOA representatives showing up unannounced at Daniel's house, lingering just long enough to make their presence known before disappearing when she confronted them. Olivia refused to be rattled. She had expected them to fight dirty, and she was ready. What she hadn't expected was the smear campaign. By the end of the week, articles began surfacing online questioning her credibility as an attorney. Anonymous sources accused her of pursuing the lawsuit for personal financial gain, claiming she was exploiting her brother's situation for publicity. Some went further, dredging up old cases she had worked on, twisting facts to paint her as an opportunist rather than an advocate. A local news station even ran a segment featuring a legal expert who insinuated that Olivia's case against the HOA was frivolous at best, reckless at worst. She clenched her fists as she watched the broadcast from her apartment, fury bubbling beneath her skin. They were trying to discredit her, trying to turn public opinion against her before the case even saw the inside of a courtroom. But if they thought a few cheap attacks would make her back down, they didn't know who they were dealing with. The next morning, she called in a favor from an old law school friend, a journalist with deep connections in the media world. "They're trying to control the narrative," Olivia told her. "We need to take it back." Within days, the tide began to shift. A national military advocacy group caught wind of the case and issued a public statement condemning the HOA's actions, calling it a blatant violation of a soldier's rights. Social media erupted in outrage. Veterans, active duty service members, and military families flooded comment sections and news reports with their own stories of HOA corruption and abuse, turning Olivia's case into something far bigger than just Daniel's house. And then came the biggest blow yet, a whistleblower. Late one evening, as Olivia sat in her office poring over deposition requests, her phone buzzed with an email. The subject line was simple: "I have information." The sender, a former HOA employee who had worked directly under Richard Dawson, claimed to have documents proving the board had intentionally targeted absent homeowners for years. Attached were emails, internal memos, and spreadsheets detailing a pattern of fraudulent foreclosures. Each case meticulously planned to maximize profit while remaining just inside the bounds of legality. Olivia's breath caught in her throat as she scrolled through the files. This was it. The evidence she needed to not only win the case but to bring the entire operation crashing down. The next day, she filed a motion to expand the lawsuit into a class action case, representing every homeowner who had been wrongfully targeted by the HOA's scheme. What had started as a fight to get Daniel's house back had become a battle for justice on a far greater scale. Richard Dawson responded the only way a cornered man could, with desperation. Days before the trial was set to begin, Olivia received an offer. The HOA was willing to settle privately, return Daniel's house, pay restitution, and cover all legal fees. But there was a catch. The settlement came with a non-disclosure agreement. If she accepted, the truth would never come to light. She didn't even need to think about it. She walked into the HOA's law office that afternoon, settlement documents waiting on the table, and met Dawson's cold gaze with unshaken resolve. "No deal." Dawson exhaled through his nose, feigning amusement. "Be reasonable, Olivia. Your brother gets his house back. You get a win. Everyone walks away happy." No, her voice was unwavering. "You don't get to bury this. Not this time." He leaned back in his chair, the mask of confidence slipping just slightly. "You really think a jury will side with you?" She allowed herself a small, knowing smile. "I don't need to think. I know, because this wasn't just about Daniel anymore. This was about every homeowner they had cheated, every family they had devastated, every soldier they had preyed on. This was about making sure they never did it again." And when the trial started, Olivia intended to make damn sure the whole world was watching. On the first day of the trial, Olivia stepped into the courtroom with the poise of someone who had been preparing for this battle her entire life. Her tailored gray suit was immaculate, her hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail, and her sharp eyes scanned the room filled with reporters, veterans, and homeowners who had also fallen victim to the HOA's schemes. She could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation of what was to come, but none of it unsettled her. Today, the truth would come to light. Richard Dawson sat across from her, his expression unreadable, But Olivia noticed the subtle signs of unease. The way his fingers drummed against the table, the tight clench of his jaw whenever someone mentioned the evidence she had gathered. He knew he was losing. The key was making sure the jury saw it too. Over the following days, Olivia presented her case piece by piece. A former HOA employee took the stand, revealing how the organization had systematically targeted families of deployed service members, exploiting their absence to seize and auction off their homes. A middle-aged man recounted how the HOA had forced his family out with mounting fines and legal loopholes. But the most powerful moment came when Daniel appeared via video call from his military base. He wore his uniform, his voice steady but filled with raw emotion, as he described the betrayal of losing his home while serving his country. When the screen went black, Olivia glanced at the jury and saw rage burning in their eyes. Then it was the HOA's turn to defend itself. Richard Dawson took the stand, trying to paint the situation as nothing more than a misunderstanding, claiming that the fees were legally justified, that the HOA had merely followed protocol. But Olivia had been waiting for this moment. She rose from her chair, walked toward him with deliberate steps, and placed a thick stack of documents on the table. Evidence of fraudulent sales, internal emails detailing their predatory tactics, undeniable proof of their corruption. "You call this a misunderstanding, Mr. Dawson?" she asked, her voice cold and razor-sharp. Dawson had no answer. On the final day of the trial, the jury deliberated for only 2 hours, a clear indication that they had no doubts. When the judge announced Olivia and Daniel's victory, the courtroom erupted in applause. The HOA was ordered to return Daniel's house immediately and compensate every victim they had wronged, totaling millions of dollars in damages. But the final blow came when Richard Dawson himself was indicted for fraud and faced potential prison time. This wasn't just a personal victory. It was the complete dismantling of an organization that had abused its power for far too long. As Olivia stepped outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed her, cameras flashing. One of them called out, "Do you have anything to say to those who've been following this case?" She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of justice settling in her chest, then met the cameras head-on. If someone tries to take away what's rightfully yours, never stay silent. Fight back. And now, if you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to help spread the truth.